our customs, all the shame that you brought onto us. But what happens? He ends up striking his own sister in his aggression, in his anger. And when they finally say, fine, just when you've relaxed and calmed down, then see what this message has to actually give you. What is it? What's being told over here? What are you getting so angry about? Have you opened up your mind enough to this message to even make a decision yet? Or have you already fallen into the trap that everybody else has? So when Umar radiallahu anhu, for the first time, he picks up the Quran now for himself, and he reads from Surah Taha, and he reads and he finds out who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is, that this Quran was sent down not to be a burden, but rather to be a reminder for the ones who are conscious and fearful of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And he gets to the portion where Musa alayhi salam is meeting Allah for the first time. This could be one of the first times that Umar in his life is ever hearing of the concept of talking to God one-on-one. One of the first times where a man is obeying God and worshiping God and nothing else. He is so moved by this. He says, take me to Muhammad. Because now it wasn't what everybody else was saying about Islam and the Quran. It was him taking a look into the revelation of God and having to see it for his own eyes and having his own heart have to read and understand what's happening over here. And when he goes now to Umar, to the house where the Prophet ﷺ was, and they say that Umar is here, Hamza says that, you know what, if Umar is here, we'll take care of it. If he wants good, we'll give him good. If he wants something else, we got something for him. We're ready for this. And when Umar comes in, he looks at the Prophet of Allah ﷺ and he says a statement that we can only say in Jannah, but he says, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa annaka rasulullah. I testify that there is absolutely nothing worthy of worship except Allah, and that you are the messenger of Allah. For years and years and years, he had hate in his heart for Muhammad ﷺ, for the Quran, for Islam. But the moment he looked at the message with an open mind, with an open heart, it didn't just change what he thought, but it completely changed the trajectory of his life. He went from being an enemy of Islam to being the second leader of Islam to follow. And this is the power of tadabbur. We don't just say that this is only limited to Umar radiallahu anhu. It could be that you read one ayah and it's so powerful. It changes the way you think about who Allah is. It changes the way about how you live your life, how you interact with your mother, your father. It changes the way you live in general. So this is something that that's our goal in this class. That when we look at the ayat, we're not just here to just study as much tafsir as possible, right? We're not just here for quality over quantity. We're here for quality over quantity, rather. We're not here just to cover as much tafsir as possible and go through as much Quran as possible. Rather, what we will cover, let's make sure it's meaningful and it's something we can apply in our lives, inshallah. So the next thing, inshallah, we'll be talking about is how do we actually do some practical steps of tadabbur? How do we actually reflect over the Quran? We'll give you a very simple formula. This is not some divine formula that, like, you know, it says in the Quran, this is number 1, number 2, number 3. This is just something that we've come up with, and this is something you can, inshallah, take from bits and pieces from here and there. Number 1, before you even start, the very first thing you have to ask yourself is, or the first thing you have to do is make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to open our hearts to the guidance that's in this book. Because without a doubt, we know, ذَلِكَ الْكِتَابُ لَا رَيْبَ فِيهِ هُدًى لِلْمُتَّقِينَ. There is guidance in this book for those who are conscious of Allah. When we come begging to Allah for guidance, do you think Allah would turn us away? When we come begging for help and assistance in the difficulty we're in, and we're saying we're coming to your book, Ya Allah, would Allah ever turn us away? We could never say no unless we don't have the proper understanding of Allah. When we know Allah is so merciful and caring, He would give us guidance when we come and ask for it, when we make dua for it. Now the practical steps in actually how do you deeply reflect over the Quranic ayat. Number 1, you should start with reading the Quran in Arabic. Even though someone might say, you know what, my recitation is not very great, I don't have the greatest recitation, what do I do? Even then, try your best to read it. Try to read it in Arabic. And if you're not able to read it to the best of your ability, you can listen to some audio and try it as well. Why is that? Because the Quran was revealed in Arabic. There's a certain reward that's associated with the Arabic. The Prophet of Allah told us that each letter you read is worth 10 hasanat, 10 rewards. And he said that alif is a letter, and lam is a letter, and mim is a letter. And each of these are a letter. And Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, just in case some of you guys love the math behind it, it's 19 letters. So 190 hasanat minimum just by saying Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. And think about all the Quran you read as a kid or even now or on Fridays. These are all things that are being added up on our scale. Now, someone might say, wait a minute, but I'm not a really great reciter, right? The Prophet of Allah even talked about that individual. He said, even for the one who struggles, and he stumbles or she stumbles over their words and they're trying their best, he said that person will have lahu ajran. They will have 2 rewards. And then he says, but the one who's excellent and excels, that person will be to the ranking of the noble angels. So the one who's like a master reciter, Allah's putting you in the ranks of the angels. And the one who's struggling, He's still giving you 2 rewards. One for the fact that you're trying and you're making the effort. SubhanAllah. Another one for the fact of you're doing it. The next thing I would recommend is once you've read the Arabic, I would read a translation. So if you don't know Arabic, I would definitely read a translation. The 2 most recommended translations that myself and my teachers have recommended is The Clear Quran by Dr. Mustafa Al-Khattab. It's a very, very good read. I personally prefer that to almost all translations over Sahih International. The other one is Mas Abdul Halim. Mas Abdul Halim, what's very good about Mas Abdul Halim is he is very good in giving you the gist and the general understanding. But when it comes to like not a technical side, but the Clear Quran by Dr. Mustafa Al-Khattab is probably one of the best translations and gives you a very good idea as well. But most people will say Mas Abdul Halim is a bit simpler, but at the same time both are really great, so you can go with either of them. The last thing is, if you read a translation and you're saying, wait a minute, I still don't understand what this ayah means, what you can do is refer to a commentary. There's not very many in English. There's Tafsir ibn Kathir, which has been abridged and shortened, and in English you can find those. My personal favorite one is Ma'arif al-Quran. This was written by Mufti Shafi Uthmani, who was the father of Mufti Taqi Uthmani, if you ever have heard of him. He's a very popular scholar in Pakistan. And he wrote this sometime in the 70s in Urdu, and it was translated into English. And this is probably the largest English commentary you're going to find in the English language. It's approximately 7 volumes. Each volume is about 600 to 700 pages. That's a lot of information about the Quran in English, and that's one of the best translations, or not the translation, the best commentaries I've seen, because it doesn't just focus about the meaning itself, but it gives you practical things when it comes to life, when it comes to rulings. It gives you a very broad spectrum. So you can easily find Ma'arif al-Quran either on, I think there's certain PDFs and websites available as well, and there's apps even for Ma'arif al-Quran if you're interested in that.
Okay, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. So the first 4 steps, making dua, reading the Quran in Arabic, reading a translation, and then reading a commentary. At this point, you still haven't done tadabbur. These are the prerequisites to tadabbur, or reflection. So the first step in reflection, again, this is just something that we've come up with ourselves, and so you have your own creative way to do it, then we'd like to hear, and inshallah we can add it to the curriculum and tell people how you're able to reflect upon the words. But the first thing that is important perhaps is to do text to text. So you're reading a text, you're reading an ayah, and how does this relate to another text? So you're reading this ayah in the Quran. What is another ayah that it reminds you of? Where have you seen an ayah that talks about something similar, or maybe something even the opposite? And so that's one of the first steps of reflecting. Where is it somewhere else in the Quran mentioned? Or what does this ayah remind me in the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ? What is a hadith it reminds me of? And perhaps upon reflection, reading this ayah and thinking about the life of the Prophet ﷺ, you may come to learn that maybe this ayah was revealed as a result of something that happened in the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ. So text to text is looking at the ayah and relating it to some other text. And even outside of the Quran, hadith, even something, a poem that you once read and it really reflected the words that are written here, or a scholar once wrote of this concept. And so just see what it connects to, because then you have another connection, you have another relationship to this ayah. It makes the ayah now more meaningful and more memorable. Number 2 is text to world. So what does this ayah have to do with the world, the environment, society, anything beyond another text, and not about yourself personally? So how does this relate to the way that this country may be treating its people? How do I see a connection between this ayah Allah is mentioning here, and how there is dhulm in the world in terms of this country? Or the poor people in this area, or even beneficial, good leadership, and when Allah talks about good leadership, so connecting it to something else in the world. And that again makes another connection between you and this ayah. Now you have a second thing to connect you and this ayah, so it makes it more memorable, makes it more easy to implement or remember. And then the third one, which is what we're going to be concentrating on a lot for ourselves, is text to self. How does this ayah relate to me? And that is what the Quran ultimately is. It is hudan lil-nas. It's hudan lil-muttaqeen. It is a guidance for the people. It is a guidance for those who are God conscious. And so what we do is we take the ayah and we can ask ourselves a number of questions. Is Allah teaching me something in this ayah? Is there something that is being taught? Is there a lesson that I can derive from this ayah? Okay. Now there's going to be a number of questions that we put out. You can see which of them, you can do trial and error, see which works for you, which one really brings thoughts to your mind, brings reflection to your mind. Some will work, some will not work at all. So is Allah teaching me something? Is there a lesson in this ayah? Is He telling me to stop doing something I am doing? So when it is mentioning these people who do this action, it's obviously Allah's forbidding something that you're not supposed to do. So step back and think, is there something I am doing that Allah is forbidding, and I need to check myself, reflect, do muhasabah, do self-reflection, and take account of what I'm doing to see, am I doing that action? Is He correcting a faulty thinking or behavior of mine? There are so many lessons in the Quran that was trying to shift an entire cultural thinking of the Arabs at that time. The way that, for example, the way that women were viewed. The way that women were viewed was, at times even in pre-Islamic society, that they were considered property. Yet Allah was revealing ayah after ayah, putting wal-muslimuna wal-muslimat. Allah was trying to correct the faulty thinking of some of the people at that time, in many regards. How does this relate to my current struggles? Okay, so anytime that you're having a difficulty in your life, and for some people, I know like miraculously how this has worked, that we had some students, particularly one female student, who mentioned to me that anytime she had a difficulty in her life, she would just open up the Quran and she would start reading. And I'm not saying that the first thing she read, the first ayah, now related to her struggle, but she kept reading, and by page 1, page 2, page 3, she would always find some sort of guidance from Allah that helped her with the struggle she was dealing with. Because that is what the Quran is. It is to help us in all aspects of our lives. So if someone's struggling with a family issue, if someone's struggling with an internal desire, temptation issue, Allah addresses and talks about each and every one of those. And so it is good to look at the ayah and see, is it something that may relate to a struggle that I am dealing with? How does this relate with my past? Okay, everyone has a past, whether it's good or bad. How does it relate to some things I may have been doing in the past that were good, that were bad? And how can I look back at this ayah and reflect upon the past and see what did I learn from what I had done in relation to what Allah is telling me? Okay, there's quite a few more. Put yourself in the story and see where you land. This is very important. This was similar to the quote that Mahad mentioned about, that Rumi had mentioned, where when you read about Fir'aun in the Quran, you don't think, yes, of course, you think about the story of the Pharaoh from thousands of years ago, but think also about the little Fir'aun in your heart. What are the qualities and characteristics of the person in this story, and what do I have of those qualities and characteristics? And so when we read about Bani Israel, so much of Surah Baqarah, so much of Surah Ali Imran talking about the Bani Israel and things that they had done incorrectly, we don't just look at it and say, yes, they did wrong here, they did wrong there, they did wrong here. It is a story for us to put ourselves in that story and say, where are the Muslims going wrong today? What are the things that we are emulating like Bani Israel? We hear stories of Bani Israel, how they were not supposed to fish on the Sabbath, but then they found a loophole. Do we find ourselves as a Muslim community finding loopholes here and there with rules that Allah has put down that are direct, and we find loopholes to try to justify? So it is not, the stories are not just to tell us a history, but we are supposed to learn from history and not allow ourselves to repeat the mistakes of those in the past. Allah says in the Quran that we have related stories to you. We have related stories to you. A lot of the Quran is actually stories. And we all know that stories are very, very engaging, and the reason is because it allows the audience to sit and imagine the story. You play out the story like a movie. A movie is a story essentially being played out. But when you're hearing a story, you're able to play it out in your head. And so oftentimes, we play out the story and put another character. But what you should do in terms of reflection is put yourself as that character. What would you have done in that situation? What have I done when I was in that exact situation in the past? Did I do the exact wrong thing? Or did I do the right thing? And how can I allow myself to continue doing that? What dua could I make based on the ayah I'm reading right now? What dua is just immediately inspired from what I read? How does this passage relate to my personal or family life? There's so many ayat about, you have Yusuf alayhi salam and his brothers, family ayahs about husband and wife, mother, parents and child in Surah Luqman. So how does this relate to me in my personal and family life, and how can I implement the good that I find in it? How does this relate in my work and student life? And then finally, how is one way I can implement this verse to attain Allah's pleasure? Just as Mahad was mentioning, quality over quantity, there were Sahaba who would memorize the Quran in small bits, just 10 ayat at a time, because they preferred to memorize and then implement and not memorize more until they had implemented. So they would only memorize small chunks at a time and would not go on to the next ayah to memorize until they had implemented it. And that is the purpose of the Quran. Guidance for what? So then we implement it and walk upon that path. So look at an ayah and see what is something that I can implement, an actual real action item that I can take home and I can do within this week, for example. Not something like, yes, great action item I will do 5 years from now. What is actually something I can take away and do immediately? And with that, so that is, this concludes the introduction to what tadabbur is, the unspoken of science of the Quran, the science of reflecting over the Quran. And now we will begin, inshallah, with the first surah, which is Surah Al-Fatiha.
Okay. Actually, before we begin, just one point I wanted to make for anybody who might be hearing the term tadabbur for the first time. There's a distinction between tadabbur and tafsir. So what we're doing over here is something called tadabbur. And tadabbur is what Allah asks us all to do in the Quran. Tafsir is a scholarly exercise. Tafsir is when we're trying to understand what are the possible meanings of the ayah. So when we're sitting over here, we're not like, well, what the ayah means is this. What we're overdoing over here is first off understanding what the meaning is. So you're getting the tafsir already kind of, and then you're trying to apply, okay, wait a minute. Now that I understand this ayah, how does it actually apply, and how do we live this? How do we understand it? So it's not just the meaning portion, because that's a scholarly exercise, but that's so interesting because that scholarly exercise is something that's meant for someone who has studied for many years, right? But when it comes to actually reflecting on it and implementing it and living it, that's what Allah calls every single person to for this book. Kitabun anzalnahu ilayka mubarak. It is a blessed book that we have sent down to you so that they could deeply reflect over the ayat. Yadabbaru. So the very first thing we'll go over is Surah Al-Fatiha. We read this 17 times a day. We know we see it in our 5 daily prayers. It ends up coming out to over 6,000 times a year. I want you to imagine now that it's your first day of work at a new company, and they tell you, we have a certain tradition around here. When you walk through the front door, you have to say, Saya ta faham. Say it for me. Saya ta faham. If anybody knows Malay, then I'm sorry, then you probably understand what I'm saying. But if not, I'm speaking Bahasa Melayu, a Malay language. Saya ta faham. Say it for me. Now imagine it's your first day of work. You see everybody walking in, and they're saying, as they come in, say salam, or say hi to the security guard, sayata faham, sayata faham, sayata faham. And you've seen this day in, day out. It's been 10 years, 20 years. You've been doing this every single day of your life. And you've been walking in and saying sayata faham, sayata faham. Do you think it's even conceivable for that to happen, that even a day or two would go by, you wouldn't be like, hey, guys, what are we saying? What does this mean? What's going on here? Who started this? What's the whole purpose of this? It's impossible. To have a mantra that you're chanting every single day and you're walking in and you're like, I don't know what it is, this is what we do. Sayata faham. So think about now, as individuals who have been reading Surah Al-Fatiha and have been reading the Quran all of our lives, or have been reading it for a portion of our lives, when we stand up in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for prayer, and we start reading Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim, Maliki Yawmiddin, and you've been reading it for 5, 10, 15, 20 years, ask yourself, do you know what you're saying in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Or is it as almost like silly as the example of, I'm going to walk in and say this statement over and over again. But remember, one was a fictional example that sounded so silly, but the other one is you're standing in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, your creator, and He gave you these words, and He said, I want you to remember me with these words. There's a night and day difference between these two examples. One is nonsensical. The other one is, it's time for us to say, you know what? I don't understand what I'm saying. Let me benefit from what I'm saying and not just understand it, but appreciate it and be able to live it. So with that, we've talked about, the importance of understanding it. Let's look at the unique incident of its revelation. A lot of times, like when you're newly married or when you first start off on your job, there's a lot of like funny things that will happen, and you'll remember them years and years later on, right? Especially with little kids. You see little kids do something silly, when they're 15, you're still mentioning it to them, like, oh, I remember when you were 3 years old, that's how you do this, and that kid has no recollection of it. So we always remember certain things based on other things. Our minds just work like that. They connect certain things together. So with the revelation of Surah Al-Fatiha, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made it very, very special. It was actually a time when the Prophet of Allah was just hanging out with Jibreel alayhi salam, with the angel Gabriel. And all of a sudden, as both of them are just hanging out, they hear a noise above their heads. And when they look up, a door or an opening opens up into the sky. And an angel starts coming down. And Jibreel alayhi salam, like imagine like somebody's a new guy at work, and like the boss comes in, like the guy who's more established there, or the person who's more established, like, by the way, that guy's in finance, or this guy's doing this or that, right? So Jibreel alayhi salam's like, that door just opened up in the sky, and it's never opened up before. He's like, that's never opened up before, that's never happened before, I've never seen that one before. So the Prophet of Allah, being a human being, being someone who's getting revelations, probably getting a bit worried, like, okay. And then he says that angel that's coming down, he's never come down before. And he's getting more and more nervous now, like, oh, okay, what's about to happen? And this angel comes to them, and he says salam to them, and he says that, Muhammad, rejoice of the two lights that your master has given you. One of them is the ending of Surah Al-Baqarah, and the other one is Fatihatul Kitab, Surah Al-Fatiha. And he talks about that your entire ummah will never be deprived of the blessing and the barakah of this surah, as long as they are, with the surah, that they will not be deprived of this. Imagine now that this is how Fatiha came down. This is what Allah wants us to read 17 times a day. Look at the entrance which Allah brought it down with. Parts of the heavens opened up that never opened up before. Angels are coming down and running special valet service that have never come down before. And He says, take these two beautiful lights, and your ummah will benefit from these. That is what Surah Al-Fatiha is. This is something that we are reading 17 times a day. We understand the importance and the special nature of it. Now we have to understand, what does it mean? What is Allah trying to call us to over and over again?
So there are, when it comes to Surah Al-Fatiha, there are numerous books written on it, even to the point, if someone was to write a book of tafsir, you may find a book of tafsir that's, say, like 500, 1,000 pages of the entire Quran. You may find a book of tafsir of Surah Al-Fatiha which is in and of itself that many pages. So people have written extensively on Surah Al-Fatiha. Some names there are numerous names, so just mentioning a few here of Surah Al-Fatiha is, number one, Fatihatul Kitab. Fatihatul Kitab, which is, we call it Suratul Fatiha, the opening chapter, the chapter that is the opening chapter, and then Fatihatul Kitab, the opening of the book. So essentially the same thing, Fatiha. So the reason it is called that is because it has been placed as the first surah of the Quran. When Jibreel alayhi salam is going over the Quran with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam in Ramadan, this is the first surah that they recite together. It is the first fully revealed in entirety. So many surahs were revealed in piecemeal, a part of the surah here, and then at a different time, a different part of the surah. Surah Al-Fatiha is the first one that was revealed, all of it in its entirety, altogether. So not that it was the first revelation, but the first surah to be its entire surah revealed was Surah Fatiha. And then of course it is the first surah that we read in the salah every time. So it is the Fatiha to salah in that case as well. It is the opening of the salah as well. Another name is the Ummul Kitab. So what does mean? Means mother. So the mother of the entire book. Because of how it, once we study it, you'll see how it is something that brings all the pieces of the Quran together in this very small, succinct surah. It is, you could say, the mother, when they say like this is the mother of all, what do people, the mother of all? I don't know, but this is the mother of all surahs, you could say. The mother of all surahs. There you go, mother of all promises. So this is
the mother of Lord. That's what this is. This is the mother of Lord.
This is the mother of all surahs. So the mother of the Quran. Finally, it's also named the Ash-Shifa and Ar-Ruqya. And we've probably heard of Shifa and Ruqya, both meaning the cure. Shifa is the cure, and Ruqya is a certain process of curing someone. And so the reason this comes about is because once there is a group of Sahaba who are on a trip, they're out of town, and they come into contact with another tribe, another Arab tribe, and the chief of this Arab tribe is very sick, and nothing they are doing is able to cure him. And so out of desperation, they come and ask this group of Sahaba, do you have anything? Do you have anything that can help us cure this, the chief of our tribe? And so one of the Sahaba come, and he starts reciting Surah Al-Fatiha, and continuously reciting Surah Al-Fatiha until the chief was cured. The chief was cured of his illness. When they came back to the Prophet ﷺ, they mentioned this, because even they were like, this is amazing. You know, they had not heard that this was something that Surah Al-Fatiha could do. And so when they mentioned it to the Prophet ﷺ, he is also shocked, not shocked because it was a cure, but he is shocked to say, how did you know that Al-Fatiha is a cure? How did you know that Al-Fatiha is a ruqya? And so from that we understand and we know that Surah Al-Fatiha is in and of itself a cure and a shifa for somebody who is sick. So if somebody is sick, you read Surah Al-Fatiha over that person, and by the will of Allah, inshallah, Allah will bring the cure if it is meant for that person. Okay. Okay. So what I want you to do, again, we said this is going to be an interactive class. So the first thing I want you all to do is, this is not going to be a discussion-based one. This is just raise your hand. What I want you guys to tell me is, have any of you had a very strong first impression of someone? Someone came and they just, something about their character was so strong that it left a very strong first impression. And if you can tell us about that.
A professor, an in-law, a spouse, someone who made a very strong first impression. Or maybe you remember making a very strong first impression on somebody else, and they're like, yeah, I remember the first time I met you, I thought you were a jerk. Bismillah, anyone want to open up? Arshia? Arshia, you have lots of students. Are you sure you can't share something? No?
I just think back to the class where you taught us about the word drug. And that resonates with me a lot. So just the over-encompassing nurture is what I recall from that class.
Okay, so specifically talking about Allah then, in that case, right? Okay, mashallah. Jimmy. Do you have anything? Anybody else want to share an experience? Nothing? You never had any bold professors or co-workers that you were just like, I am not going to have it with this person, like this is not going to work out? Man, y'all have not had very fruitful interactions. Like,
I remember, well, I'll share. I remember one of our professors in Malaysia, Dr. Saeed. Dr. Saeed, the first time we walked into the class, he was probably the most strict teacher. Someone walked in 30 seconds late, and he was asking them, why are you late? Why did you come here late? Why, you know, that person was like completely embarrassed. And everyone was so scared and afraid of this teacher, like, I'm going to drop this class immediately. So our first impression of him was he's very strict, he really cares about punctuality, and don't ever mess around in his class. He ended up being one of the most amazing professors, and he actually had a lot of love for us, but he always tried to make a very strong first impression so that we would...
To weed out all, like everybody else.
To weed out all the people who are too scared to stay in his class. But the first impression I had was he was very strict and strong-natured.
So the whole purpose of it is that we know that that first impression that's made on us can be a very lasting one, right? The first time you see somebody or you hear them talk for the first time, it's something new. It's like, oh, I've never seen you before, and you didn't just start off with like a regular hello. It was like a howdy and like a smack on the back and stuff. Like it was like, okay, this person's from a different cloth than I am. I get it. They're a bit different. Okay, I'm gonna know.
I have something to share.
Go for it, please.
Several decades ago.
Yes.
Go for it.
I had a history teacher in high school, and she used to just pick on anybody in class and say, okay, something she would ask randomly, and if you couldn't answer it, write the answer 10 times. So you better not sleep in her class.
Better not sleep in her class.
So you knew, yeah.
So what was your impression of her?
I gotta be alert, and I'll be sleeping, and her name is Mrs. Mirza.
Never forgot
that. Never forgot
her
that.
name.
I can remember her face too.
Alhamdulillah. So first impressions and those initial impressions are something that are very, very strong.
So now this question, I do want you guys to sit in groups. So try to find groups of 3 per, 3, or just try to keep it to 3. What I want you to do is decide for yourself, first think by yourself and then share with your group mates. How would you describe Allah in 2 words?
If you say Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim, you're cheaters. So don't say Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim. And think, and even if 2 words might be like, you guys might be like, oh, let me think of 2 names of Allah. If 2 words is limiting you and you're not able to convey your idea, just say, imagine if a non-Muslim asked you, if you could describe God to me in 1 sentence, how would you describe him to me?
Okay.
What would your introduction of Allah be to somebody else who has no idea? Or to a young child or to a non-Muslim coworker or a friend or someone you know, how would you introduce Allah to somebody else? That's the question. So get into groups of 3s, inshallah.
And we'll be coming around. Let's see, 3, 2, 3. Okay, that's fine. That's fine. It's okay. 4 is good. We have a lot of something going. How are you? Good. I'm going. What did you jump ahead to? Mahad put you on the spot. I understand. Actually, yeah, you must have an answer. Oh wait, this is on. Everyone can hear me.
You want to share some of their thoughts?
Do you want me to let them share?
How much time do we have? What time is it? No, let's keep going. Just quickly summarize and let's go.
Okay.
Quickly. If you want to summarize. Let's give us some tafsir. Oh, what's happening? Oh, that's fine. Yeah.
Okay. All right, Bismillah.
Assalamu alaikum. If we can have you all turn around, inshallah, and get back with the rest of the class.
So I just want to hear a raise of hand. Just I'd like to hear at least one answer.
Louder.
I'd like to hear. Can you guys hear me? Okay, so I want to hear one answer from this side. A word that you would use to describe Allah. I heard something here that was different. I heard a lot of similar things in three of these groups. I heard something different here. Go ahead.
I think our group kind of, in both of our words, it was a balance of kind of like opposites. Like for me, it was sort of like a judge, but then also a guide.
Okay.
Okay. Judge and guide.
Judge. Okay. A judge and a guide. Okay. Excellent. Excellent. Okay.
For the guides, I kind of changed up the question on them. I said, if you had an elevator pitch to make, like someone's like just sees you, you're like, you're Muslimish, right? You look kind of Muslimy. Who's God? How would you be, like, what would you say to them? Like, you would have to give them a sentence within like the span of maybe 2-3 floors, and you're like, well, God is, boom. And the guys gave some very good answers, mashallah. So anybody want to share from their side? If they start nominating your group members, start pointing at them, and they have to start talking, basically. There we go, perfectly done.
One word we came up with was omnipresent.
Omnipresent. Jameen. What else do we have? Brother side?
I heard that here as well.
Yes.
Omnipresent.
Just.
Most just.
Jameen. Now, since with the shortage of time, let's go into now that how does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala present himself, right? Imagine the very first day of school, right? We gave you the example of a professor. Imagine a professor walks in and he just goes right to the podium and he says, listen up, you scrubs. I run your lives now. I tell you when to get, this is more of a drill sergeant, not a professor. Like, I run your lives now, I'll tell you when to eat, sleep, breathe, whatever, right? You couldn't imagine this. What would happen is people would just start leaving the class. Now we have to ask ourselves, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala introduces himself over and over and over in the Quran, how does he do that? And does the way he presents himself, is that what we also think about and understand of God over and over again? Or do we have a completely different idea of God altogether? So how does Allah do it? He says, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. And what we'll do is every single time we get to an ayah, we're actually going to go ahead and recite it as a group, inshallah. So we're going to read A'udhu Billah Isti'adha. I'm going to read it first and you guys can recite afterwards, inshallah. A'udhu Billahi Minash Shaytanir Rajim. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Now what that means is, one of the translations will be, in the name of Allah. And if you're like, what does in the name of Allah mean? We'll explain it inshallah. In the name of Allah, the abundantly merciful, the ever merciful. There's other ways of translating it, but we're going to get into the nuances when we actually talk about Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim later on. But the first idea over here is, what is God trying to give us? What is Allah trying to give us about himself? It's two ideas of compassion, of mercy and love. Abundant mercy and ever merciful. If that is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is giving us in terms of impression, if that is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is giving us in terms of impression, think about this. When you think of Allah, is the first thing you think about his anger, his might, his power over you? Or do you think, I know Allah has my back, Allah loves me, Allah is merciful and compassionate with me? Every single surah in the Quran has Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, except one. And then even that one also, in the other ones you have Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Think about that. Think about when you've messed up so bad at home, and you've had to leave home perhaps, you had to leave your family. And when that statement is said to you, look, you might not be in a comfortable place now, but this is always your home and the door is always open. When we as human beings feel far away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we feel far away from the Quran, Just remember what Allah tells us. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. In the name of Allah, the abundantly merciful, the ever merciful. When we feel like we're too far to come to it, we're too far to come back to the book of Allah, remember what He's trying to remind us. That the welcome mat's always here. The mercy of Allah, the doors of Allah and His mercy are always open. All we have to do is decide that we want to return back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Over and over again. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. He's reminding us, start, begin in the name of Allah, the abundantly merciful, the ever merciful. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. I also want to give an idea of, actually since time is kind of running out, that's fine. How much time do we have left? Still have? Okay, that's fine.
3 minutes.
Maybe we can do basmala. Okay. Okay, what we can do is just, instead of doing, we wanted to have a discussion for this one, but just for the sake of time, real quick, I want you guys to just think of 1 or 2 ideas in your own head. What are the benefits of saying Bismillah? Because we know the Prophet ﷺ, as Muslims were taught at a young age, say Bismillah, it's a good thing. Just real quick, I'm going to give you guys each like 10 seconds. Think of something in your head and then put your hands up and share it, inshallah, one after another. So what are some benefits of saying Bismillah? By saying Bismillah in the name of Allah, what have you done? So just real quick, I'm going to give you a few seconds just to think about it. What does it help you with when you say Bismillah? Yes?
Starting something with good intentions.
Starting something with a good intention. By you saying Bismillah, you're like, wait a minute. I'm about to do something for the sake of Allah. It's for His sake. Excellent. Yes? Same thing? Okay. Good. Yes?
Kind of like if the outcome isn't necessarily what I hoped for, well, I did it in beautiful.
Allah.
Be disappointed.
Regardless of the outcome, regardless of the effort and what the end result was, I knew this was for the sake of Allah and Allah had my back the entire time. So even though my effort is what's important, not the result. And that's something that's, when we talk about in corporate America, in real life, it's the opposite. It doesn't matter what your effort was, is the result we're looking at. But when you have Allah on your side, my effort is what's being judged. Maybe I didn't pass completely, but when Allah's looking at your effort, alhamdulillah, you're good to go. When Allah's looking at your effort, not your boss. Don't get it twisted. What else? Yes? Starting with confidence. Jameel.
Absolutely, yeah.
What else? Your side? Ubaid.
You hope for ease in that thing you're about to do, or like goodness, and like you hope for that better result.
Very good. One word in English or Arabic would be barakat. That you're asking for some kind of goodness, that Allah would shower your act with goodness. What's so interesting is the Prophet ﷺ, he teaches us that before you eat, before you drink, before you wake up, in so many different instances says, say Bismillah, say Bismillah, repeat it over and over again. Because it's meant to bring goodness into our lives. It's meant to do all of these things. Just to give you a quick Arabic kind of feature of this, a lot of the translations, it's not showing up over here, sorry, yeah.
You're in control.
Yes.
You're in control of Allah.
Yes. That Allah is in control of the entire situation. I'm sorry it's not showing up over here, but yeah, we'll do it next week. That's fine, inshallah, no problem. So we'll talk about, inshallah, the benefits of saying Bismillah next week, and we'll go into practical understandings and actually how to live it and be able to have a much more meaningful understanding of it. But we know that, inshallah, from now until next Friday, try to make it a habit. As you're getting up, as you're sitting down, before you're about to do work, like even the mundane stuff, you're like, Bismillah, what's going to happen? What's going to happen is once you've said Bismillah, you've turned that action into an action of consciousness with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala first and foremost. Even if it's your taxes or you're doing something that you just don't want to be doing, you're like, okay, at least I'm remembering Allah. And it's hard because this entire week will go by and it'll be Tuesday, you're like, oh yeah, Bismillah, I forgot about that. But alhamdulillah, in the Quran you're reading Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim regularly. But part of what we can try to do, inshallah, is before we eat, before we drink, reminding one another. One thing that our students would do is they would put like an alarm on their phone called like the Bismillah alarm. So before you eat, my alarm's going to go off, or I know I'm going to have lunch at this time, just say Bismillah. It'll pop up on your phone, or put it up as a screen background, inshallah. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to accept from us and to be able to take these lessons that we've learned this week, inshallah, and to be able to be more mindful of Him, inshallah, in this coming week, and to read the Quran and use some of these things. Inshallah, we'll make these slides available for you guys if you want to go through the different ways of asking questions and trying to reflect over the Quran. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.